The thing that stands out for me in thinking about this trip, we've talked a lot about my mother and our sort of fraught relationship. And they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of extra money. The idea of going to Europe would not have been something that they would have done. But my dad was president of a professional association, and as a part of that, he got 2 first-class tickets on Air France to Paris. And my mother, knowing that I was going to major in French, said, "You and your dad go, and I'll stay here." And it was the most genuinely unselfish thing she ever did, although she used the opportunity to get a facelift and take care of herself.
Yeah.
It took care of me, and it provided a complete life-changing experience for me and my dad to do this traveling together, and for me to experience the world in a big way.
And you had never gone on a trip like that with just him before?
No, never gone on a trip with just him ever to anywhere. So it was very, very special.
What year was this?
This was in 1967. Wow. 1967.
How old were you?
I was 18. Yeah, I was 18. And I will say also about this period, and this could account for the fraught nature of the relationship with my mother, I was crazy about boys. I just loved boys.
What did you like about boys?
I just loved having a boyfriend. Everything that I did was sort of organized around boys. And at the point at which I went on this trip with my dad, I thought about it long and hard. Boyfriends, trip with my dad. It was a toss-up, and in fact, I told him I wasn't going to go. And then I thought, are you crazy? A trip to France?
Yeah.
You'd never get that. I mean, boys come and go.
Yeah, why did you think you had to choose?
Well, I just didn't want to put it off. I wanted a summer doing what I wanted to do, and then it was an impossible choice. So I told my dad I wasn't going. And then oh my God, what if he cancels? And I raced over and knocked on the door of his office, and he wasn't there. And so I wrote this panicky note and slid it under the door. "Please don't cancel the trip. I'm in.
How much time had passed before you had a change of heart?
Maybe a couple of hours.
Oh, so it was
fast.
Quick.
And going back in time a little bit, when we did a summer in Seattle after my senior year of high school, just getting ready to go to UT, I got homesick in Seattle, and I wanted to go back to Norman.
And you were with your dad on this trip?
Our whole family went to Seattle. He was a visiting professor at the university there. We had a wonderful house we lived in, but I just had enough. It was a tough summer in many ways, but anyway, so airlines were on strike. So I said, well, I'll just get on a bus. I don't know how many people today would just put their daughter on a bus from Seattle to Norman, Oklahoma, but they did. And
so you left early.
I left
because
early.
You were homesick.
I left early because I wanted to get back and see my friends and have some time, because I was just getting ready to go off to school and it was going to be way different. Anyway, I met a guy on the bus. How unlikely is that? Just my age, getting ready to go to the Merchant Marine Academy. He lived in St. Louis. We hit it off on the bus. I have never had so much fun ever. But of course, it shows a little bit of how impulsive and flighty I was, because I had a boyfriend at the time. Did I stop to think about loyalty or whatever? Not at all. I just wanted to experience the full range. So he came with me to Norman, Oklahoma. He got off the bus, disrupted his trip to St. Louis.
Oh, wow. He really, he liked you.
Susan Luttrell picked us up at the bus station in Oklahoma City. We got to my house. My folks had turned off all the utilities. It was 1,000 degrees. There was no water. There was no air conditioning. Anyway, he spent the night, and And there was no more than that. There was no sex. There was nothing. But we just had this really good connection. And we stayed friends for several years. Interestingly enough, we got to the airport at JFK in New York.
Is this now when you're about to go on this trip to Europe?
That's right. A year has passed. We've been corresponding by mail. And we get to JFK. He's at the Merchant Marine Academy. I'm at JFK. They're just so close to each other. Anyway, I called him up from a payphone at JFK, and we began to talk. And we talked. And we talked. And I didn't hear the announcements for the flight.
No
and
way.
My father didn't know where I was. And they boarded the entire plane, and I was not to be found. And I hung up the phone, finally, looked at the time. Oh my God. And there was no one else anywhere around the gate area. And some people from the airline found me and said, we've been looking for you everywhere. So I got on the plane, and everyone on the plane gave me the stink eye.
You got the stare of death.
Oh my God. And my father didn't say a word. He just went with the flow, you know. He was very much like me. He would have done the very same thing in my situation.
Wow.
So we set off on this trip, and we did the chateaus on the Loire. We did Paris. We did it on a shoestring. Like I said, he had the free plane ticket, but we didn't have a lot of cash. And this was before credit cards. And
So
getting money from a bank, it was difficult, and neither of us had much experience doing that in a foreign country, in a foreign language, when most people didn't speak English. It was quite something in 1967.
But you made it work.
But we made it work, and we saw incredible things.
So is this how you started your sort of love affair with Paris?
Yes, definitely how I started my love affair with Paris and all things French. And, you know, as an example, we went in Paris to the Comédie Française, which is the premier. It's like Shakespeare Santa Cruz, only on a national level. Maybe the Royal Shakespeare Company. All in French. And Granddaddy, who spoke not much French, knew a little French. He just went because he knew that French was my thing. And that was, you know, my parents were really unselfish in so many ways, and I don't give them enough credit, I think. So we rented, after Paris, we rented a car, a little Fiat 500, little tiny car. And we went to the Riviera, we drove to Switzerland, we put a lot of miles on that little car.
So it wasn't just France on that trip.
It wasn't just France. We saw a lot of stuff. And at one point, the lock failed, and being naive, we didn't know what to do. We just kept going. And so we bought a bicycle lock that would keep the door shut, but it wasn't the lock on the car. And then at another point, the starter motor broke on the rental car, and we weren't going to disrupt the trip by stopping, and I think my dad was afraid they would charge us for repairs. So here we are with no lock on one side, and the starter doesn't work. So what's the solution to that? It had a stick shift. So when we looked for a hotel, we were looking for a cheap hotel in a good location, but it had to be on a hill. So
every time you push the car, you would have to literally push the car and then jump start it.
That's right. That's right. So we were quite the sight for American tourists in France with this little tiny car. And I had the biggest suitcase in the world because Grandmama wanted us to go to this fancy fabric store and buy enough material to make curtains for the living room. So this suitcase was full of this material that weighed, 7,000 pounds, and we carried it from place to place through our entire trip.
At what point on the trip did you stop at the fabric store? Was it towards the beginning?
Towards the beginning. So we had it with us the whole time. Yes. Yes, Paris was the first stop, naturally, arriving in Europe on Air France.
Right.
And then we took what was called La Flèche d'Or, which was the really ritzy train trip from Paris to London. It cost the earth to do, but that was what we were going to do. We were going to take the fancy train.
So this is the same route as the Eurostar, but
Yes.
but probably more slow
Yes,
and more elegant.
And much more elegant with the fancy dining car and all of that. And at that point in time, there was no Eurostar. And
Right.
the train was loaded onto a ferry, which crossed the English Channel.
They hadn't built
They had
it yet?
They had tracks that the train could just roll onto the ferry.
Oh, that's
Cool.
cool.
It was an adventure. And we ended up staying in a fancy hotel in London called the Regent Palace. And the Regent Palace comes back into the story because after I married David, we learned that he was on a trip the same summer I was with his parents, and he stayed at the same hotel in London that my dad and I did at the very same time.
At the same time.
And we didn't cross paths with each other.
It was like the stars had already predicted and aligned.
Stars were in alignment in 1967, but we didn't know it.
Wow.
So that's sort of the story of the European trip. We ended up back at JFK, and I'm really seriously homesick at this point.
Yeah, how long were you gone?
We were gone 6 weeks.
Wow, that's a long time.
It is a long time. And between us, we had 10 cents in American money. Enough for one phone call to my mother to pick us up. And there weren't even answering machines then,
So if she didn't answer, you
there
were
was
out
no
of luck.
way. That's right. So that was hard, but we made it work.
And she answered?
She did answer, yes. So while we were doing this mega trip, we lived on sacks of Israeli oranges and chocolate, which we would eat in the car like a picnic everywhere we went. And we enjoyed going to cafes and learning to have cafe au lait for breakfast. And it was quite a wonderful trip. So that was my summer vacation in 1967.
That's incredible. So the issue with having to jumpstart the car, that was present the whole time after the issue occurred. Like you didn't stop anywhere and get it repaired
no,
or anything like that.
No.
And so what happened when you turned the car in?
We didn't say a word. We just coasted in, turned the car off, turned the keys in, paid the bill, and went on our merry way.
That is so awesome. And how did that trip level up your relationship with Granddaddy?
Well, I think what I learned was just the magnitude of his flexibility and patience, which contrasted with my mother's non-flexibility and non-patience. And, there were so many things that happened. When we got back to turn the rental car in, Granddaddy had somehow not been apprised of the fact that we would be paying mileage in addition to the daily rate. And so whatever cash we had, it went totally for the rental car. So we got to the hotel in Paris last night before going on to London, and we had nothing. We had nada to pay the hotel bill. Did we go ahead and check in? Absolutely. And so in the lobby on the day that we checked out, we were surveying the people in the lobby, and in those days, you didn't necessarily have to have a check from your bank to pay a bill. You could cross out the name of the bank and handwrite in the name of your bank and write a check which would be accepted. And that's just what he did. Granddaddy found someone who was willing to give him a blank check so that he could cross out the name of the bank, write his bank there, and pay our hotel bill.
That's completely preposterous in
know,
today's age. That would never,
never
happen.
No.
That is so incredible.
But it's a good example. Nothing fazed Granddaddy. A challenge would come along and he would laugh it off. And there we go.
Wow. It's so interesting because you've sort of adopted a little bit of both aspects of granddaddy and grandmama. Like
Yes.
you have the plan, right? And yet when life inevitably throws plan B your way, you kind of laugh it off and make do. And then
improvise. Yes.
As we say, it becomes a trip adventure.
That's
and
right.
sometimes, many times, almost all of the time, those mishaps can be some of the most memorable aspects of the trip.
And that's one thing that we worked hard to cultivate in our family, right?
Yes.
And you can see by when I recount from a trip, the most interesting and funny parts of the trip are always the misadventures that come along.
Right.
Yeah.
What an incredible story. And so this, it seems to me at least, from what I hear you saying, is that this was sort of the trip that catapulted you into your interest in traveling yourself.
Absolutely.
And organizing and planning these sorts of trips throughout your life.
That's right. It gave me the confidence and courage to just go for it. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. And that's you and your first dog, Jeff, right?
That's me and my first dog, Jeff. So this was the summer of 67. The summer of 68, I got married. I married Jim Peach. Again, crazy about boys. And I was happy to have one, though, for my very own. And one of the things that we did was to adopt. Actually, there was a couple of things. I wanted to have a baby. I wanted to have a baby right away. I wanted to have a big family. You know, it took me much longer than I thought. But Jim said, well, how about if we try a dog first? And so we got a dog, and I named Jeff because that's what I would have named my first child.
Really?
Yes, it would have been Jeff.
Not Jonathan.
Not Jonathan. No, Jeff was a dog, and by the time you came along, it was not going to be Jeff again. It would be Jonathan.
That's really funny. So you didn't know at this point in your life that your blood disease was
no, I had no
you
idea.
had an inability to have a child.
That's right. I just thought if I wanted to have a child, instantly I would get pregnant, and it didn't turn out to be that way.
Wow.
So that's that scrapbook.
Awesome.